Hi, anatomy students. This will be the recording of chapter 13, which is on blood vessels and circulation. This is your final chapter before your next lecture exam, which will be on chapters 10 to 13. And that will be on Thursday, November 5th, just right at 11:30. So we classify your blood vessels outside of the heart into whether they're pulmonary or systemic vessels. Pulmonary vessels will transport blood from your right ventricle of the heart through the lungs and back to the left atrium, and that is to pick up oxygen. The systemic vessels will transport blood from the left ventricle of the heart through all parts of the body and back to the right atrium, and that is to deliver oxygen. So the functions of these blood vessels, the main function is to carry blood. Also, the exchange of nutrients, waste products, gases within tissues will occur at the capillary level of these blood vessels. They transport other substances like hormones, ions. They will regulate blood pressure, and they also direct blood flow to different tissues. So here are the vessel structures. Arteries carry blood away from the heart. They are thicker, but with lots of elastic, so they're able to stretch. Veins carry blood toward the heart, and they are much more thin with less elastic. Capillaries will be where the exchange occurs between blood and tissue fluids. Blood flows from arteries into arterioles, which are smaller. Blood will flow then into capillaries. Capillaries will then become venules, which are small veins. Venules will turn into small veins, and then these veins will return the blood back to the heart. The blood vessel walls are made up of 3 layers or tunics. The tunica intima is the innermost layer. This is a simple squamous, very thin layer. The tunica media is where your smooth muscle will be, the middle layer. Also, there's elastic and collagen for stretching in this layer. And then the tunica adventitia is the outermost layer. So here's the differences looking at a microscopic view of a artery and a vein. And you can see here how the tunica media layer, the muscular layer, will be much thicker in arteries, and veins, their tunic layers are much thinner. Arteries also have the ability to maintain their shape, and veins often collapse on themselves. So types of arteries, your largest arteries are the elastic. They have the thickest walls, and examples of these are the aorta and pulmonary trunk. Then you have muscular arteries, which are medium to smaller size. They are also pretty thick in diameter. They will contain smooth muscle cells, so they're able to control blood flow to body regions, either by constricting their blood vessel or dilating it. So here are the arteries, looking at the different tunic layers between elastic arteries and between the muscular arteries. So there's that. And then capillaries are where blood will flow from the arterioles into the capillaries. Capillaries are just branching networks of blood vessels, and blood flow will be regulated by smooth muscle cells into these capillaries. And we call those smooth muscle cells pre-capillary sphincters. So the blood flow through your capillaries, and again, your capillaries are where all of the nutrient exchange and gas exchange will occur. So oxygen will be offloaded in capillaries, carbon dioxide is picked up in capillaries, but the blood flow is controlled through these capillary beds by these different pre-capillary sphincters, which are just little pieces of smooth muscle that can close off those kind of pre-capillary blood vessel walls. Here's the capillary structure. Extremely thin walls. They consist of only a simple endothelium surrounded by a delicate, loose connective tissue. And then there's types of veins. The different types of veins, blood flows from the capillaries then into venules. Blood will flow from venules into smaller veins, and all 3 tunics are present in small veins. The medium-sized veins collect blood from small veins and deliver to larger veins, and the larger veins will actually contain valves to keep blood flowing in just one direction. So here's blood vessel structure then, looking at different arteries and veins, and then the capillaries are there. Again, they're the thinnest. And again, you can see how the arteries, all of them have much thicker tunica media layers, which is the smooth muscle layer to control blood flow, whether they constrict or dilate. This is a look at how veins have valves, and this is really helpful with the veins in your legs to try to get the blood back to the heart from your legs or your feet is extremely difficult to move against gravity. So your muscles will kind of squeeze or push the blood up through the veins. And then once the blood gets to a certain height, these valves will close to keep the blood at that certain height, just to try to help get the blood back to the heart. Then the pulmonary circulation vessels, again, pulmonary circulation is blood moving from the right ventricle to the lungs and then back to the left atrium of the heart, filled with oxygen. The pulmonary trunk will be where blood is pumped from the right ventricle towards the lungs, and the pulmonary veins will exit the lungs and carry oxygen-rich blood back to the left atrium. The systemic circulation carries blood from the left ventricle to all the tissues of the body and back to the right atrium. Oxygenated blood from your pulmonary veins will go into the left atrium from your lungs and then into the left ventricle, and from the left ventricle into the aorta. And then your arteries will distribute this oxygenated rich blood from the aorta to all portions of the body. And this is just a great picture depicting the blood flow through this circulation of the body, whether it's pulmonary, which has to do with getting oxygen from your lungs, or systemic circulation, delivering the oxygen to all your tissues. You can also see here how there's capillary beds, or there's the liver kind of has its own capillary circulation system. The digestive tract does, your kidneys as well, because your kidneys will filter all the blood. So all the blood has to go through the kidneys as well before returning to the heart. Parts of the aorta, the ascending aorta is the part that passes superiorly from the left ventricle. The aortic arch are the three major arteries which carry blood to the head and upper limbs will come off of the arch. And then the descending aorta extends through the thorax and the abdomen to the pelvis. The parts of the aorta, the thoracic part of the descending aorta extends through the thorax to the diaphragm. And then the abdominal descending aorta extends from your diaphragm, where it eventually will divide at the common iliac arteries to bring blood down to each leg. So here's the major arteries. Here's your descending aorta, and it will split into common iliac arteries, which will travel down the leg. So these are the arteries and all of their branches. Branches of the aorta, you can see them here. I would spend some time looking at this, and I'm going to post an announcement later, kind of how detailed you need to know all these branches. But it's just important to know that every tissue, every cell, every major organ needs blood supply. So that's why you have so many branches off the aorta, which will come directly from the heart. The arteries of the head and neck, and this might explain a little more what kind of branches you need to know. Branches of the aortic arch, the brachiocephalic artery was that first branch that comes off of the aorta on the right side. Then the left common carotid artery and left subclavian come off. The brachiocephalic artery is the first branch, and it supplies blood to the right side of the head and the neck. The left common carotid is the second branch, and that supplies blood to the left side of the head and neck. And the left subclavian artery is the third branch, and that supplies blood to your left upper limbs. And then the brachiocephalic artery on the right side branches into a right common carotid, which supplies blood to the right side of the head and neck. And the right subclavian goes on to supply blood to the right upper limbs. So here we take a look, we can see here the aortic arch. Here's the brachiocephalic artery. So this is showing the right side view. We can see the right common carotid artery bringing blood supply up to the head and neck, and the right subclavian artery will go on to the shoulder and supply all of the right upper limb. Here are all of the cerebral arteries, and they make a circle, which is really kind of cool. It's called the cerebral arterial circle of Willis. And this circle then has different branches that go to every part of the brain. So it's really interesting to see how the arteries branch within the brain. Here are the major arteries of the head and thorax. So this kind of shows their branching. This is really helpful to see kind of where the branches go and what they supply blood to. And I'll let you guys kind of pause the lecture video here and read all of that on your own. The arteries of the upper limbs, the axillary arteries, are just a continuation of those subclavian arteries, and they'll supply blood deep to your clavicle or your collarbone. The axillary artery eventually becomes the brachial artery, and this is where blood pressure measurements are taken. So your brachial artery is in the upper arm area. The ulnar and radial arteries are then just branches off of your brachial artery. The ulnar artery will go down the medial side of the bone, where the medial side of your arm, where your ulnar bone will be, and your radial artery will supply the radial or lateral side of your forearm. So here are arteries of the upper limbs, and you can see how they branch from this picture. The abdominal aorta branches, we have celiac trunk arteries, superior mesenteric arteries, and inferior mesenteric arteries. These are just three branches that come off of the descending aorta in the abdomen, and they each supply a different part of your GI tract, your spleen, your liver, or your colon. So these are just three major branches that come off of the descending aorta in the abdomen. Here are more abdominal aorta branches. We have renal arteries that go to your kidneys, hepatic arteries go to your liver, testicular and ovarian arteries go to the testes and ovaries, respectively. Inferior phrenic arteries will supply blood to the diaphragm, and lumbar arteries will supply blood to the lumbar vertebrae and back muscles. So I think the key here is to know what these arteries supply blood to, and a lot of what they supply blood to is given in their name. Renal has to do with kidneys, hepatic is liver, here are the gonads, so keep that in mind as well. Arteries of the pelvis. The common iliac artery are the branches from the descending abdominal aorta. They will divide into internal and external iliac arteries, where your internal iliac artery supplies blood to your pelvic area, your bladder, your reproductive organs, and your external iliac artery will continue down the leg to supply blood to your lower limbs. So again, pause the lecture video here, take a look. This just shows you the descending aorta and all the major branches off of it in order, and then what they supply blood to. So this is a really great way to see it from a different viewpoint. The arteries of the lower limbs, then your femoral artery supplies the thigh, the popliteal artery supplies blood to your knee, and then you have anterior and posterior arteries just supplying blood to your leg and foot, either on the front or back side of the lower leg. And the fibular arteries will supply blood to the lateral leg, and that's rightly named because the fibula bone is on the lateral side of your lower leg as well. And then the arteries of the lower limbs, you can see here just how they are labeled. So again, you can kind of see their branching is there. The veins will all return blood to the heart. In systemic circulation, the blood returning to the heart is always deoxygenated. In pulmonary circulation, the blood returning to the heart in the pulmonary veins is oxygenated because it's coming from the lungs. So most often veins carry deoxygenated blood, except when they're returning to the heart in the pulmonary veins directly from the lungs. So your superior and inferior vena cava, superior returns all the blood from the head, neck, right and left upper limbs, and inferior vena cava returns all the blood from anything below that. They both empty into the right atrium of the heart. And you can see here the upper veins and how the superior vena cava empties blood into the right atrium from all of the upper limbs, head and neck, and the inferior vena cava brings blood back to the heart from all the lower limbs, from the abdomen and the thorax region. Veins of the head and neck, you have an external and an internal jugular vein. They'll both empty into your subclavian veins, and they both drain blood from the head and neck, and the internal jugular will drain blood from the brain. The subclavian veins will form brachiocephalic veins. So we kind of have this kind of funnel system of veins kind of joining up with each other to eventually empty out into the superior vena cava. And then your brachiocephalic veins will join to form the superior vena cava. So here we have the superior vena cava and how we have a left and right brachiocephalic vein. And again, they're named left and right for how they would be on a person, not for how we're looking at it. And then we can see as an example how the right brachiocephalic vein will branch into the subclavian vein, which drains blood from the upper limbs. And then the internal and external jugular veins will go up to the head and neck region. Brachial veins empty into the axillary veins. Cephalic veins empty into the axillary vein and basilic vein. Median cubital vein is near the elbow, which connects to the cephalic vein. And you can see here how the veins are so labeled. The median cubital vein is located there. So these are veins of the upper limbs. Veins of the thorax, you have a right and left brachiocephalic vein, again, drains blood from the thorax to your superior vena cava. The azygous veins drain blood from the thorax into the superior vena cava, and internal thoracic veins will empty directly into your brachiocephalic veins. You have posterior intercostal veins on the posterior thoracic wall. They'll drain into the azygous vein. And then you have what we call a hemiazygous vein, which will receive blood from the azygous vein on the left side. So here's just showing how everything drains from the thorax into the superior vena cava. You can see here the accessory hemiazygous vein, the azygous vein itself, posterior intercostal veins. Everything eventually is draining again into the superior vena cava or the right brachiocephalic vein to bring blood back to the heart. Then we get to the abdomen and pelvis. A lot of the veins are named similarly to how the arteries would be named. So your common iliac vein empties into the inferior vena cava. So it's the branch that will come from the legs. The common iliac vein is formed from your external and internal iliacs. Your external iliacs are what is draining blood from all of your lower limbs. They'll empty into your common iliac vein. And the internal iliac vein drains blood from your pelvic region. So from your bladder, reproductive organs. The renal vein drains blood from your kidneys. So this is kind of showing the blood, and the blood will be flowing up the inferior vena cava to try to get back to the right atrium. And you can see all the branches in order and what they're draining blood from. So again, a good slide to just pause and take some time reading through that a little bit. The hepatic portal system. So the liver is a major processing center for harmful substances, drugs, alcohol absorbed by your GI tract. So it has its own kind of drainage system, and we call it the hepatic portal system. It's the vascular system that begins with capillaries in the viscera or anywhere else in the body, like around your digestive tract, and ends with capillaries in the liver. It uses the splenic vein and the superior mesenteric veins. So what it's doing is it's draining blood from the liver after it's been kind of cleaned out or processed from the liver. So your liver is kind of your body's detoxification mechanism of detoxing all the blood. So these major veins will drain blood from the liver and bring it back to the inferior vena cava. Veins of the lower limb, so your femoral veins drain blood from your thigh and empty into the external iliac. The great saphenous vein will drain from the foot and empty into your femoral vein. So the great saphenous vein actually travels the entire length of the leg. Popliteal veins drain blood from your knee. And here's a look at those labeled there, the veins of the lower limbs. Blood pressure is the measure of force of blood that it exerts against the blood vessel walls. Systolic pressure refers to the contraction of the heart, and diastolic pressure refers to relaxation of the heart. Normal blood pressure, you want to be at 120/80 or below that, not above it. In order to measure blood pressure, and a lot of you, I know, are EMTs, you probably know how to do this. You'll take a blood pressure cuff and squeeze off the artery. And when you open it back up or allow the pressure to be released from that cuff, you can hear turbulent blood flow back through the artery. The first sound that you hear is the systolic pressure, or the number above the fraction. And the last sound you hear, and at what pressure that will be the diastolic pressure. So that's how you measure blood pressure. And what you're measuring is the turbulent blood flow, where you're measuring the blood coming back through a blocked artery that's being open due to pressure release from the cuff. Pulse pressure is the difference between systolic and diastolic pressures. So for example, if we have a BP of 120/80, the pulse pressure would be 40. And pulse pressure points can be felt near large arteries. So here are body locations to evaluate pulses. The femoral artery, there's some in the ankle. The radial artery is probably one you feel on your wrist. And then the common carotid is one you can feel in the neck region. Capillary exchange, this is the exchange across capillary walls. It will occur by diffusion. Blood pressure, capillary permeability, and osmosis will affect the movement of fluids across capillary walls. The net movement of fluid will go from blood into tissues, and fluid is gained in tissues is removed by the lymphatic system. So excess fluid will just be removed by your lymphatic system.
Look at their feet.
Capillary exchange then just refers to the net movement of fluid either out of the capillary or into the capillary. So just again showing net movement of fluid out of the capillary into the interstitial space, and how diffusion will take everything back into the capillaries. Local control of blood flow is achieved by relaxation and contraction of these precapillary sphincters. When they relax, blood flow increases. It's controlled by the metabolic needs of tissues. So if your tissues need more oxygen, these precapillary sphincters will relax to allow more blood supply to go through them so oxygen can be dumped out. Blood flow increases when oxygen levels decrease. And this just shows how these precapillary sphincters will relax or contract to control blood flow into the capillaries, and that will control how tissues get offloaded or back into the capillaries. Your nervous system controls blood flow in the vasomotor center. It's part of your sympathetic division. It controls blood vessel diameter. The vasomotor tone is the state of partial constriction of your blood vessels. An increase will cause your blood vessels to constrict and blood pressure to go up. And then your hormonal control of blood flow, the sympathetic division also regulates hormonal control by the release of epinephrine and norepinephrine from the adrenal medulla, which is a gland above your kidneys. In most blood vessels, these hormones cause constriction, which reduce blood flow, but in some tissues like skeletal muscle and cardiac muscle, these hormones will cause the blood vessels to dilate to increase blood flow to try to increase oxygen unloading to your skeletal muscle and cardiac muscle. So here it just shows the nervous regulation of blood vessels due to the sympathetic system coming from the vasomotor center in the medulla oblongata. Mean arterial pressure, MAP, is a calculated value that reflects an average arterial pressure in various vessels in the body. Several regulatory mechanisms will ensure that blood pressure remains adequate for this task. The body's MAP is equal to cardiac output times the peripheral resistance. Cardiac output is equal to heart rate times stroke volume, and peripheral resistance is the resistance to blood flow in all of the blood vessels. So this is calculating your body's mean arterial pressure of the vessels. The MAP will change in response to changes in heart rate, stroke volume, or peripheral resistance. It also changes at your lifetime. It's about 70 millimeters of mercury at birth, and it's maintained at about 95 from adolescence to middle age and may reach 110 in a healthy older person, showing just how your mean arterial pressure gradually changes over time, even if you're healthy. Baroreceptor reflexes activate responses to blood pressure in the normal range. They respond to stretch. They're located in the carotid sinus and aortic arch. They will change when there's peripheral resistance, there's a heart rate change, or there's a stroke volume change in response to blood pressure. So here's the baroreceptor reflex mechanisms located in the aortic arch and carotid sinus. They'll stretch in changes to blood pressure, and that stretching will be sensed. And then the vasomotor center in the medulla oblongata will elicit some sort of response to try to counteract that change in blood pressure. Baroreceptor effect on blood pressure, you can read through this and how a homeostasis, whether you're increased or decreased above the blood pressure norm, how the baroreceptor reflex and effect will be taken to the brain and elicit some sort of response to get the blood pressure back into the normal range. Chemoreceptor reflex, same type of thing. These are sensitive to changes in blood oxygen, carbon dioxide, and pH levels. You have chemoreceptors located in carotid bodies and aortic bodies, which lie near your carotid sinuses and the aortic arch, and they'll send any deviation from normal along the sensory nerve to the medulla oblongata. And you can pause this slide to read through kind of these chemoreceptor reflex mechanism arc. The adrenal medullary mechanism are stimuli increasing the sympathetic stimulation to the adrenal medulla. The adrenal medulla will release hormones. I call them your adrenaline hormones, epinephrine and norepinephrine. They will increase your heart rate and stroke volume and vasoconstriction, and they'll also dilate blood vessels to skeletal and cardiac muscles. So this will be a sympathetic fight or flight response to kick in adrenaline. And this is the adrenal medullary mechanism. Then the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone mechanism is caused when there's a drop in blood fluid or blood volume. It causes the kidneys to release renin. Renin acts on angiotensinogen to produce angiotensin 1. Angiotensin 1 gets converted to angiotensin 2, which will cause vasoconstriction of your blood vessels to try to increase blood pressure, and also acts on your adrenal cortex to release aldosterone to try to retain water to increase blood volume that way. So aldosterone acts on your kidneys to try to conserve sodium and water. It will result in less water loss in your urine and blood pressure maintained. And this is the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone mechanism. Again, will kick into gear if there's a decrease in blood pressure or blood volume. ADH, so antidiuretic hormone, your hypothalamus will release ADH when concentration of solutes in your plasma increases or your blood pressure decreases. And ADH acts on your kidneys to absorb more water to result in maintaining blood volume and maintaining blood pressure. And this is the mechanism of antidiuretic hormone. Long-term control of blood pressure, again, kind of combines a lot of these receptors and control centers all together at the same time. So whenever there's any sort of disturbance in homeostasis, you'll have receptors and control centers sending out effectors, whether that's vasodilation or vasoconstriction of your blood vessels to try to maintain blood pressure in the normal range. How do your blood vessels age? Arteriosclerosis makes arteries less elastic. Atherosclerosis forms from deposits of materials in arterial walls called plaque. So this is a buildup which could lead to a blockage. And factors that contribute to atherosclerosis are lack of exercise, smoking, obesity, diet high in cholesterol and trans fats, and some genetics. And this is just showing how an atherosclerotic plaque can build up in a vessel wall and could eventually lead to a blockage, which could then lead to a stroke, an embolism, a heart attack. And that's the end. Thanks for listening, guys. Look for a kind of study guide and announcements posted about the upcoming test, and I'll try to give you a few key things to study in that.